Hello again, everybody. We are using our time today to talk about Central Africa. First off, the countries included in what we're going to consider Central Africa are going to be these right here. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but places like Cameroon, you've got the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They're right across from one another. Good to know which one's which. So places like that right here in the central, obviously, part of Africa. When you think Africa, there's generally two different types of Africa that you think of. You think of desert Africa, which is 100% going to be true in the north and in the south, and then you think about like the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa. This is the type of place, this Congo Basin. This is where you think of the jungle portion of Africa. Okay, so just like we did, previously, I'm not going to go through everything. I've highlighted a handful of things in each one, and that's really where we'll kind of pay most of our attention. First off, some physical things. Um, as far as physical features, there's really going to be two big ones. There's going to be the Congo Basin or that Congo, forest, jungle, rainforest, whatever word you want to use for it, and the Congo River. Okay, the Congo River has also been called the Zaire River. There's going to be some differences of opinion on what the actual name of it is, and all of that will make a lot more sense towards the end here. So big mode of transportation of food, of water, is going to be the Congo River. As we said, very dense jungle rainforest area known as the Congo Basin. This is a lot like the Amazon basin, the Amazon jungle, in that very dense, very difficult. Um, it has prevented a lot of travel over the years. There's not a whole lot of interaction that's happened traditionally by groups on either side of it because it's just so dense. But they've run into a lot of the same kind of problems. People that want to burn, slash and burn for farming have typically found that just like with the Amazon, it's not a very fertile place. So a lot of people have been moving from the agricultural sector into the cities or onto the larger to work on the larger plantations that are taking up the fertile land that is available. You will see some savanna around the outside, like we said, in northern when we were talking about the Sahara and the Sahel. You have that area kind of in between on the edges of the desert are going to be this savanna kind of area, and you're basically going to see that to the north, the east, and to the south of this basin area. All right, Kinshasa and urbanization. Kinshasa has become a huge, major international world city. Um, Population of about 7 million actually make it larger than both Boston and Washington, D.C. You've seen a lot of the population happen really since the 1960s, and the basin and the jungle and the conditions there have an awful lot to do with that. But it's been a place that has attracted a lot of people from all over. So a very large international kind of feel to the city of Kinshasa. So a very unique cultural blend, a lot of traditional, a lot of modern, a lot of rich, a lot of poor. Some people that live very modern ways, some people that live, very traditional ways. And people from not just Democratic Republic of the Congo, but really from all over the area have come there. And that has led to what we call interdependence. Now, interdependence is a vocab word that is going to mean that, hey, we depend on somebody else, they depend on us just as much. You have two cities, you have Kinshasa and you have Brazzaville. Brazzaville going to be the capital of the Republic of Congo, Kinshasa being the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They actually are just across the Congo River from each other. There's actually a bridge that connects the two. When they built that bridge, both sides kicked in, both sides played a part in building that, um, and because of their proximity, they have decided, hey, you know what? There's going to be certain things that Kinshasa will do. There's going to be certain things that Brazzaville are going to do, and they're going to kind of work together to fill in the gaps for each other. That's the concept of interdependence, and this is a prime example of where it just makes sense to do those kinds of things. Many countries, specifically here, but really throughout Africa, are a part of what's called the CFA, or the African Financial Community. Just like in Latin America, we said sometimes the abbreviations don't quite match up because of the English translation. Okay, this is going to be one of those. So the CFA, best way to think of that is going to be, it's sort of like the European Union for Africa. Same kind of thing. They're going to work together economically for the betterment of everybody. Okay, some diverse natural resources. You're going to find both renewable and non-renewable here. But just because something's renewable doesn't necessarily mean that it's being treated that way. For example, if I have a renewable resource that I use way too much, it can absolutely become sort of like a non-renewable, simply because I don't give it time to replenish itself. You do see some of that happening in this part of the world. Renewable resources, the obvious ones, rivers. Hey, big, huge river that can do an awful lot of good, but the same positives and negatives that we talked about with the Nile are going to exist here too. We already mentioned the jungles, the rainforests. They're going to have the same kind of problems with deforestation that we saw in the Amazon. Um, the little bit of a difference here is the variety. They do have a very valuable resource in some of the different types of trees, different types of woods that they have that are really sought after in a lot of the different parts of the world. That being the case, on mahogany, ebony, things like that are going to fetch a high price. So when it comes to that resource, what do you do with that? Really, the way they've looked at it here in Africa is, okay, what's a better way to go? Should we look at trying to replant? Should we look at trying to conserve? What's the right way to go for Central Africa? And ultimately, what they've realized is that replanting in that part of the world and getting that to grow again, because of how slowly it happens, that is more costly than to just try and let's conserve it, drive the price up. People won't buy it nearly as much, but we'll get more for it, and I won't give it the time to kind of replenish it. They still try to take advantage of it economically. They're just going about it in a different kind of way. Non-renewable resources that we're going to see here, primarily minerals. Most of the larger nations are going to have some sort of mineral resources, but realistically, the biggest ones, it says here, a third of the world's diamonds. Obviously, that's going to mean a heck of a lot more than some of your other ones. Copper is great. Copper isn't used for a lot anymore. Diamonds are something that a lot of the world wants and is willing to pay big money for. Cobalt is another one there. Most cobalt in the world. Big thing for cobalt is it's used for things like cell phone batteries. So that is becoming a bigger and bigger resource as time goes on. All right, so finally, we want to look at one of these countries. We don't have time to go through every single one, so we're just going to pick one and kind of use that as a kind of a case study of what's life like in this part of the world. So we'll look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo because they've had a lot of kind of interesting things in their history. Okay, so they had been a Belgian colony. Just like we said, most of these countries in this part of the world are going to be colonized by somebody from Europe. The Europeans were going to come in with a major interest in the resources that were going to be available there. Okay, so Belgium is there. They have been taking advantage of the resources that are there. And within a week of this country gaining its independence, and by the way, Belgium was very, very, very harsh with the people there. That would definitely be something that I would recommend looking at, because not a lot of people know much about what happened with Belgium and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Anyway, so Belgium decides they're going to grant independence, and within a week of that happening, a revolution happens. You still see some Belgian troops that are there. You see some rebel armies. United Nations are there trying to keep the peace. And mercenaries, they're all going to be battling to see, okay, who's going to take power in the country. Ultimately, they wind up electing this guy, Patrice Lumumba, as their prime minister. And his big thing was, hey, we want to be about us. He wants all African nations to cut ties with their colonizers, get rid of the colonizers, get rid of Western influences, just be about us. Naturally, the Western countries are going to see that as a threat, including right here in the USA. The United States actually approved an assassination of Patrice Lumumba because of what they saw as the threat of him potentially maybe going communist, maybe being a threat to Western nations. So they actually had an assassination attempt take place. Okay, so Patrice Lumumba is killed, and they replace him with General Mobutu Sese Seko. He is going to become a dictator, and he's going to rename the country Zaire. He is put in place by the West, including the United States, and ultimately Zaire becomes a very pro-Western country that has a lot of ties to Western countries. For a little while, things get really, really good, and then next thing you know, in the 1980s, Zaire's falling deeply, deeply, deeply into debt. We talked about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Okay, for those who don't remember, we have this thing called the World Bank, where rich countries are going to put money into to promote stability and security around the world. Poor countries can apply to the World Bank for loans through what's called the International Monetary Fund. And if you do that, just like if I went to get a car loan, I would have to agree to a lot of things. Well, for the IMF, you have to agree to a structural adjustment program. Let the UN come in, let the World Bank come in and say, hey, here's why your country doesn't work very well. You have to do these things in order to get the money. Um, so that was put in place and decided, nah, I don't think I want to do that. Ultimately, Zaire by the 1990s owed about $9 billion to foreign banks, and all the while, Mobutu's personal wealth was considered to have risen into the billions. You do the math. The country owes billions to banks. Mobutu suddenly is a billionaire. What's happening? Obviously, he's embezzling money for himself. All right, so by the 1980s, 1990s, you're seeing some democratic change taking place in this part of the world. They're going to be a part of that as well. Okay, so he says, all right, we'll allow for democratic elections, we'll allow for all this stuff to take place. But when it came time to actually abide by that, when it looked like somebody else was going to win, he just simply refused to give up power and had the army and police um, under his control. So they were going to do what he told them to do. It meant, economic chaos. It meant political rivals being put in jail and executed. It wasn't until 1997 that finally he gets overthrown, and this guy Lawrence Kabila comes in. One of the first things he wants to do is change the name, because the only reason they're called Zaire is because of Mobutu. Who was it that has financially ruined the country? Mobutu. But there are certain people that are supporters of Mobutu that will still use the name Zaire to this day. There are certain people that absolutely hate everything that he was about and want nothing to do with the name Zaire. That's where Democratic Republic of the Congo comes in. So this guy Kabila is in power for about 4 years before he winds up getting assassinated, and his son Joseph ascends to become the president. Um, He is successful in getting some of those foreign troops to leave, getting some of those other groups out of there, getting groups to agree to share power in the early 2000s. He does a good enough job that he gets reelected in 2006. So that's kind of where we stand today. You still see a lot of tensions in this part of the world, but that's kind of the cycle that you've gone through. You've seen peace, then you've seen war, and a lot of it comes back to you had Europeans that came in that stripped a lot of these countries of a lot of their resources. So you either have a situation where countries don't have resources at all and are really really poor, or they do have resources and that becomes the source of a lot of, and for the most part, violence.